because it shouldn't be shut down quickly. This, of course, was nonsense, because such plants are designed precisely to shut down quickly in case of an accident. The side letter contained a number of other problematic points, such as a time limit on negotiations and IAEA resolutions, suggesting to me there was no real meeting of the minds. Finally, Iran announced on November 14th it was accepting the deal and would suspend enrichment and reprocessing on November 22nd. Hossein Mousavian, Iran's chief nuclear negotiator, also announced, "Europe will support Iran's joining the international group of states possessing the ability to manufacture nuclear fuel once the suspension ended." Hassan Rouhani, head of Iran's National Security Council, had a press conference announcing, "It's no problem if Iran wants to start uranium enrichment. Based on the agreement, it is said that the Europeans will support Iran to become a member of the Fuel Cycle Club." What a deal. The EU3 assured us they had pressed Iran to stop making such statements, as if that would solve the problem. Even they admitted Iran had clearly not made a strategic decision to give up the pursuit of nuclear weapons. On Monday, November 15, 2004, Colin Powell opened his staff meeting by announcing he was resigning as Secretary of State, departing at the end of Bush's first term. He then left for the White House, and Deputy Secretary Rich Armitage continued the meeting. I was surprised there was no applause or other show of support when Powell left, but perhaps the news was just too shocking. Later in the month, during a stop on a previously scheduled trip to Latin America, Powell apparently decided to talk to the press. Armitage told me Powell spoke at some length about intelligence on Iran's effort to weaponize their nuclear capability and to fit it into warheads consistent with their ballistic missile efforts. I was stunned, but even more stunned when Powell himself called, starting off by saying, "You're not going to believe what I just did." I am rarely speechless, but I was then. For whatever reason, he began discussing information we had recently received, getting in deeper and deeper. He said to the press, among other things, "I have seen some information that would suggest they have been actively working on delivery systems. You don't have a weapon until you can put it in something that can deliver a weapon. I'm talking about what one does with a warhead. We are talking about information that says they not only have missiles, but information that suggests they are working hard about how to put the two together." I was delighted. First, I hadn't done it. Second, I thought this was exactly the kind of intelligence we needed out in public to show exactly what Iran was up to. Now that Powell had spoken, I could refer without qualm to his press conference in the jungle in Brazil and let reporters draw their own conclusions. Third, this information came as the EU3 raced hell-bent toward the latest agreement with Iran. This sort of weaponization information was precisely one of the red lines I had previously asked John Sawyers and William Ehrman about, which they had said would mean the end of negotiations with Iran. In the end, of course, it meant no such thing, proving what I always believed, namely that these negotiations were really an EU3 effort to prove they were different from the United States and that Iran was not Iraq. Now that Powell had made at least some of the intelligence public, however, it was far harder for Sawyers or anyone else to sweep it under the rug. Our immediate problem was that the timing of this latest EU3 Iran deal, right before the November IAEA board meeting, aborted yet again our efforts to get a referral to the Security Council. Even worse, the EU3 would make a sustained effort to have the IAEA board endorse their deal, and they were already beavering away, although we, the Aussies and the Canadians, wanted something tougher. While the EU3 had enough spine to resist us, they melted before a persistent Iranian whining campaign, weakening their own draft considerably. They did so even after Iran came through for us once again, proposing at the last minute to keep 20 centrifuges up and running for experimental purposes. Incredibly, the EU3 once again changed their IAEA board resolution, downgrading their deal with Iran from a legally binding agreement to a voluntary suspension. This EU3 self-loathing of their own deal had to provoke hilarity in Tehran, and I certainly wasn't going to save the Euroids from themselves. We detailed our objections to the resolution in an explanation of vote that was 9 single-spaced pages long, the most important line of which was that we still reserved all of our options about convoking the Security Council. The resolution, another opportunity missed, was adopted on November the 29th. Iran played its role perfectly, announcing that suspension would last months, not years, until the end of negotiations with the EU3, when the carrot trucks rolled into Tehran. By late December, the press reported that Iran continued conversion work at Esfahan. Condi Rice started off her tenure as Secretary of State following a tough line on Iran. By late February 2005, however, she began to wobble, largely because of Nick Burns, newly installed as Undersecretary for Political Affairs, State's number 3 job. Burns quickly renewed an earlier relationship with his UK counterpart, Political Director John Soares, and was his faithful conduit into the State Department. Unfortunately, the big shift, much applauded by the Euroids, came on March 11th when Rice publicly endorsed the EU3's negotiating efforts in exchange for a commitment from them to go to the Security Council if those efforts failed. Of course, that's what the EU3 had assured Powell they would do in summer 2003 when they initiated their fruitless negotiations with Iran. Part of the shift also allowed Mohammed el-Baradei to get his 3rd term as Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which was a mistake, but which was probably already foreordained by Powell's lack of enthusiasm before he left office for our campaign against el-Baradei. Once again, however, Iran came through, as I knew it would, helping my efforts to get to the Security Council. In May 2005, because the EU3 carrot trucks had not rolled into Tehran, Iran threatened to resume conversion and enrichment. In June, Ahmadinejad was elected president, bolstering the hardliners and undercutting their smiley-face public diplomacy in New York. Thus, when I arrived at the UN in August, Iran itself had again changed the political dynamic of getting a Security Council referral. In my first courtesy calls, French Deputy Perm Rep Michel Duclos said without qualification that he expected to see Iran in the Council by the end of August. British Perm Rep Jones Perry was pessimistic, worried that Russia and China would block anything we tried to do. The EU3 concluded they needed an IAEA resolution calling on Iran to return to the suspension it had agreed to, and they worked away frantically yet again in Vienna to save their deal. On August the 11th, the IAEA board passed another weak resolution, pushing matters off until September, when another el-Baradei report was expected. At the September IAEA board meeting, we counted over 20 votes to refer Iran to the Security Council, but the EU3 were unwilling to break the spirit of Vienna by forcing a vote, especially without Russia and China. Despite every EU3 effort, on Saturday, September 24th, the IAEA board had no alternative to a vote if it was to have any further role. The EU3 text, finding Iran in non-compliance with its non-proliferation treaty obligations, but not explicitly referring it to the Security Council, prevailed by a vote of 22 ayes, including India, importantly, 1 nay, the irrepressible Venezuela, and 12 abstaining, including Russia and China. In November, again at the EU3's request, we sought no IAEA referral of Iran to the Security Council. Meanwhile, as the leader of one group said to me, in very short order, I might be the last Republican left standing at State. Rice, they concluded, had been captured. On January the 10th, 2006, the Iranians reverted to form by breaking IAEA seals at the Natanz enrichment facility and resuming research work. With that, the EU3 finally concluded it was time to go to the Security Council, just over 2 years after they should have done so. Even Russia unhappily agreed, showing the impact of Iran's unambiguous public resumption of enrichment-related activities. Both Kofi Annan and Mohammed el-Baradei immediately took steps to prevent any referral. Annan called a meeting of the Perm 5 plus Germany to describe a call with Ali Larijani, now Iran's chief negotiator. Al-Baradi suggested that Iran be allowed to keep a pilot-scale enrichment facility, an idea closely resembling the research exception we had earlier rejected, just as we did this one, not that it slowed Al-Baradi down. Iran was also spinning out propaganda, including a willingness to consider a Russian proposal on enrichment, which Rice unfortunately endorsed, thus implying legitimacy for peaceful nuclear activities by Iran, even as it violated the Non-Proliferation Treaty by seeking nuclear weapons. The Perm 5 foreign ministers plus Germany had dinner on January 30th in London, as Iran threatened to put Israel into a permanent coma if Iran were attacked, an unsubtle reference to Ariel Sharon's coma after his massive stroke. The ministers agreed that the February 2nd IAEA board would refer Iran to the Security Council, which, inexplicably, would take no action until after the March IAEA board meeting. The IAEA voted to approve the referral on Saturday, February the 4th, 27 in favor, 3 opposed, Syria, Venezuela, and Cuba, and 5 abstaining, Algeria, Belarus, Indonesia, Libya, and South Africa. Yet another blow to the spirit of Vienna. Having worked out a draft Security Council presidential statement with Britain and France, giving Iran 15 days to suspend enrichment activities, we scheduled a Perm 5 meeting for Thursday, March 9th. French Perm Rep de la Sablière handed out the draft presidential statement, and we adjourned. On Friday, our 1.5-hour Perm 5 meeting can be described simply. Russia and China would not engage in line-by-line negotiations. We met again on Monday, and the Brits and French had a weaker draft, retreating and compromising out of habit. I read from a New York Times story quoting former Iranian negotiator Rouhani. In a remarkable admission, Mr. Rouhani suggested in his speech that Iran had used the negotiations with the Europeans to dupe them. Quoting Rouhani, "While we were talking to the Europeans in Tehran, we were installing equipment in parts of the facility in Esfahan, but we still had a long way to go to complete the project," he said. In fact, by creating a calm environment, we were able to complete the work on Esfahan. Close quote. As a result of the negotiations with Europe, he added, we are in fact much more prepared to go to the UN Security Council. The EU3 were deeply embarrassed by Rouhani's comments, although not enough to change course. During the week of March 13th, the Perm 5 political directors were constantly talking, continuing to water down the draft presidential statement while we remained largely at rest in New York. Rice decided that we should finish the presidential statement before a Perm 5 plus Germany foreign ministers meeting on March 30, which we did. The text was read out on March 29th. As I hoped, on March 30th, Iran rejected the presidential statement. By April the 11th, we were hearing from the IAEA that Iran had enriched uranium to reactor-grade levels, meaning their 164 centrifuge cascade worked, news to greet al-Baradi as he arrived in Tehran on yet another of his pilgrimages. The Brits and the French introduced a modestly improved draft resolution in the Council on Wednesday, May 3rd, one of the first meetings for Vitaly Churkin, the new Russian Perm Rep. De la Sablière stressed that we wanted the resolution passed promptly, so that the expected 30-day waiting period for Iran to comply would expire before the next IAEA board meeting in mid-June. Since I had no expectation Iran would comply, that meant we would start on a sanctions resolution by mid-June. Nonetheless, in subsequent Perm 5 meetings, Russia and China stalled, meaning that the odds of finishing the text before the foreign ministers met on Monday, May 8th, diminished rapidly. Although a Saturday informal council meeting ended inconclusively, de la Sablière once again stressed hopefully that we should vote on the resolution the coming week. The Perm 5 plus Germany dinner May 8th turned out to be one of the great debacles of the entire Iran matter. The foreign ministers spent 2 hours alone before dinner, agreeing to a 2-track approach, continuing to pursue a Chapter 7 resolution while also allowing the EU3 to present a new package of carrots and sticks to Iran. This approach had been discussed among the EU3 political directors and Nick Burns in March, but I thought we had killed it, since it showed weakness to Iran at precisely the point we should be showing strength.